Hello to everybody that's watching. This is the fourth episode of our Teacher Talks, sponsored by the Falcon Feathers at Seattle Pacific University. Feathers stands for Future Educators in the Arts Transforming Human Experience and Realities. My name is Christopher Hansen. I have the pleasure of serving at SPU as the Director of Music Education and Orchestral Activities. This is our fourth week to have these conversations with incredible scholars and educators in the field of music education. This week we are joined by two of my former colleagues, absolutely extraordinary educators. They're working at San Marcos High School as choir directors. We have Brigitte Smith, which is over to my left or your right, depending on how your screen is oriented. And then below me is Dawn Sheridan-Reinhuber. I'm so happy to have them with us. We're talking about the extra musical benefits of a music education, particularly in public schools. Each week I've tried to pick a topic that's come up in some of my music education courses, things that I think are significant for future music educators to consider, and things that are important for practicing music educators in public schools. And this is a topic that I think is really valuable, especially in the midst of school shutdowns and everything that's happening with COVID. But even beyond that, I think we study a lot about pedagogy, and particularly in art education, we learn a lot about our craft and we become great artists or musicians or dancers or actors. But once we get into the classroom, there's this whole educational piece, and some of that gets covered in pedagogy. But then there's this human piece where we're not just teaching musicians and artists and dancers and actors, we're actually teaching human beings. And we're teaching them to engage with each other and make art with each other. And that's something that doesn't always get covered in our teacher preparation courses. And in your first few years, you learn that by doing. And I was so incredibly blessed and fortunate to have both of these extraordinary women as role models. When I started my career in public schools, I was teaching in San Marcos at Goodnight Middle School, and then transitioned to teaching to Goodnight and Miller Middle School. And Brigitte was serving as the choir director at Goodnight Middle School at the time, and Dawn was serving as the choir director at Miller Middle School at the time. So it was extraordinary to get to see them and work with them. And I started working at San Marcos High School, and they each made their transition to the high school in subsequent years. And so I have been very fortunate to see them and work with them and process how they engaged their students in things beyond music, right? And not just the music. They were absolutely doing that and doing it very well, but their students had a very rich and important connection with them, and they learned from them how to be good human beings and how to be a team and how to work together and to collaborate in order to make music. And I don't know that music was ever the end goal for them, at least from my observations. They really wanted to make incredible young people. So we're going to be talking to them and asking questions about their experiences in the field, and probably sharing some silly stories about the time that we worked together and supported our students as Tri-M advisors and all kinds of cool things that we got to do together in San Marcos. I see some people that are chiming in. Hello to Mackenzie, it's great to see you. And CJ Odom, one of the administrators of San Marcos High School, it's great to see you, sir. As we're having this conversation, please know that it's not just between the three of us. If you have any questions or comments, I've got our Facebook Live feed up on a second screen, and I'll be able to read those and bring those into the conversation when appropriate. As some of you know, if you've watched these teacher talks before, this is all a part of something that we want to offer from Seattle Pacific University in this unique time of online learning and engagement. And so as we're having these conversations, I'm always happy to start them with a prayer. SPU is a Christian university, and we wear our faith proudly as something that helps guide us through so much of our lives. And so for anyone, however you like to participate in prayer, if you're just listening or if you bow your head, however you want to participate, I just want to say a brief prayer and give thanks for this time that we have together. Lord, thank you for friends and colleagues. Thank you for their wisdom. Thank you for the experiences that we'll share in this conversation. I hope that it blesses people that are listening, particularly future music educators and practicing educators, our colleagues from around the world that are trying to navigate what their job looks like in a new time of online learning, in a new time where so many expectations are shifting and changing basis. I'm so grateful for both of these extraordinary educators and the example that they have set and the things that they continue to do that inspire not only their students, but all of the other people that work around them. Thank you for this time. And I hope that it blesses the people that are listening. And I know that I'm grateful to be able to reconnect with my friends and colleagues. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I know a lot about you guys, but I'd love for the people that are listening. I see a few more people, Jonathan and Sally and Kathy and Ray. It's so great to see you guys listening. Feel free to type in any questions that you want. See one of my SPU students. Colin, it's great to see you joining again another week. Let me know if you have any questions. But let me start with Brigitte. If you would just tell us a little bit about yourself. I say us because, again, I'm totally jaded. I know a lot about you, but a lot of the people that are listening might not know a little bit about your background, maybe how long you've been teaching, and kind of where you're coming from.
Okay, so I just, this is my 13th year. I have taught all grade levels, K through 12. I did a year in elementary school. I did a year in intermediate, just teaching 6th. And I trained to the middle school, taught 6th through 8th grade. I want to say 7 years. I may be wrong on that, but maybe 6. And then I went to the high school with Dawn, and so this is the end of my 4th full year. And I've actually have only ever taught in San Marcos. I even student taught here. I did my elementary student teaching in Hayes and Kyle, but other than that, like San Marcos through and through, man. So
go Rattlers.
I have 2 kids. I have one that is a senior, so he's dealing with this whole COVID thing as a senior. He is a musician also. He's gone through our choir program. He went to Miller Middle School with our friend Mario, also amazing. And he's in band, and he's just a great musician, and he is looking to major in music. So, and then on top of all of that, I have a 3-year-old, and I am married to a band director that works at the same school. So, and I've known Dawn for a really long time. I've known you for a really long time. So, yeah, it's kind of all in the family here.
Way back from Texas State days, which is surreal to think about, actually. I think I was coming to Texas State maybe right at the tail end of when you were leaving.
Yes, I remember, I think I was student teaching maybe.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to put the phone in. It doesn't want to charge. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I think you were working on your master's when I was headed out. I may have been in my first year teaching. I think I was still there when you were there.
Yeah, it was right in that year, and that sounds right. I think you were student teaching because you weren't on campus as much.
I graduated in 07, so that's when I graduated, May of 07.
Wow, it's crazy.
I know.
And you have your bachelor's is in music education, and then you have a master's degree in choral conducting.
Yes.
From Michigan State?
Michigan State. Mm-hmm.
Michigan State. That's right. And that was something recent that just happened, correct?
Pretty recent. I started in 2013 and I finished in 2015. So I finished the summer before my last year at Goodnight. Yeah. So, yeah, I finished that summer, and then I started Goodnight, got pregnant, and then I transitioned to the high school, kind of like not really mid-year, but not at the end of the year. So it was a really strange year. And then I started my first full year there. I started on leave. So definitely rocked my whole world there.
And I only bring it up because for everyone listening, I just think it's an extraordinary part of Brigitte's story to have at that time. Kaden, I think, was just transitioning to high school, and she was working on this summer's master's program at Michigan State. It's a great program, and then ended up getting ready to have her second child and was transitioning from being a middle school director to a high school director. It was an extraordinary feat that she did very, very well. So for everybody that's listening, that's thinking about, how do you find that balance and you're juggling, those might be questions that you have. I would assume that Brigitte has some great advice to you, because I think she navigated it very well as that bystander, as a friend that was seeing her have to do all of that. It was extraordinary to watch.
Well, and just, I mean, I I don't think that anything that I've done is like amazing. I think I did what I needed to do, you know? And so I did just put this out there for anyone who ever has any questions. I went through being a music major as an undergrad as a single parent, as a music educator, as a single parent. You know, I didn't become a two-parent household till my son was in middle school. So yeah, like it's hard. Like balancing your personal life is hard, but it can totally be done. So
Nice. Dawn, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, gee. Okay. My path was very different from Brigitte's. I did not know that I wanted to be a teacher, really, until I was teaching. And I think it's one of those blessings that come to you even though you didn't really need it or want it. And as a young musician, you sort of jump in, you know, with both feet, hoping that you're going to find something, hoping that, you know, that the skills you have to offer someone's looking for at the right time. And so I went to Rice University as an undergrad, and I got a degree in vocal performance. And rightly so, as most college kids in their undergrad, I kind of ended my junior year and went, what am I thinking? Like, what am I going to do with this? And sort of sat in the front seat of my mom's car going, no one's going to give me a job when I'm 22, and I'm not ready to sing on any kind of stage yet, and, you know, and I'm not going to be able to make enough money to live. And I just kind of gave it up to the universe and God and the you know, the music muses, and hoped that something would happen for me. And what did happen was I met my now husband still. He was starting his graduate work at Rice when I was going into my fourth year. And it just so happened that lined up beautifully. He's a pianist named Sheridan-Reinhuber. And after he graduated with his master's and I finally finished my undergrad after 5 years, we moved to Germany together. And so I sort of began my whole professional life in a country that I didn't know, and in a language that I was just learning. And it was a huge time of upheaval, but it was also very exciting. I mean, I'd found the love of my life, and I knew I wanted to be doing something with music, and I knew that Germany was a great place to be. I just had to learn German first. So, yeah, necessity made that happen. And it just so happened that I auditioned for grad school in Frankfurt at the Hochschule für Darstellende Kunst in Frankfurt. And I did get accepted a year later. They said, go, you're great, but go home and learn German. So that way you can follow all the coursework. So I met my then teacher and I studied voice for a year. And then I enrolled in the school a year later with enough knowledge to get through the coursework. And in the meantime, I had a fantastic opportunity to sing a recital at the music school where my husband was teaching, where Joachim had gotten a job. And just so happened, again, Providence, that the voice teacher there got pregnant. And they needed a long-term sub to teach voice. So I had just sung the recital and they liked me. And I didn't think I was a worthy candidate because I didn't think my German was good enough. But the boss there, Burkhard Fleckenstein, he had a lot of faith in me and said, oh, you'll learn it while you do it. So I literally sat there in my voice lessons teaching these poor people with a German to English or English to German dictionary and figured it out as I did it. And I think that a lot of young music students at the time, they don't really realize that they do know more than your average citizen. And that a lot of the skills that you work on for so long and the knowledge that you gain along the way, that you actually do have things to offer people. So when I started realizing, hey, I actually do know enough to start teaching people. And I found the one-on-one interaction in voice lessons was exactly what my heart needed at the time. And everyone was so wonderful and patient with me. Of course, we think it's very charming when someone has an accent, so I guess they thought that. And they were very patient with me and gave me a break. So I got my start teaching really one-on-one in private voice, or in a voice studio setting. And I was given the opportunity to teach chamber music and small choral ensembles, but not anything like a public school setting here. So when my husband and I, after 14 years, we decided to move back to the States so that my husband could pursue his doctorate.
14 years? I hadn't realized that.
Yeah. I lived and worked in Germany for 14 years. Mm-hmm. And I started working almost right away. Maybe 9 months in, I got that opportunity to start working at the music school there, and I stayed on staff the whole time. So luckily in Germany, it's fantastic. Please don't anyone knock socialist medicine, because the lady who I subbed for, she got to stay home on maternal leave till the child was 18. So she just kept extending her leave, and hey, I kept working, so it was fantastic. Yeah. So anyway, it was just a great stroke of fate that I got to then work at the same school as my husband. We got to do all kinds of fantastic projects together. We paired up our pianists with my voice students, and then me being the only American in the small town where we lived, I suddenly became the authority for gospel music, and I got to teach a gospel choir. So that was like my real first choir ever that I could call mine. And I've got stories. Anyway, then we moved back here after 14 years. Joachim started his doctorate, and I did the alternative certification route. And so
wait, this is, I don't mean to interrupt, but this is important for context. So, because Joachim was at UT, right?
He enrolled at UT for his doctorate.
Yeah, so he was doing his DMA at UT, and so you were in Central Texas. But it's interesting to me that you had started sort of teaching in Germany, but you were a product of public schools. You grew up in San Antonio, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm definitely a product of public schools, went through the whole all-state process. Was very, very blessed to have made it my junior and senior year, and it paid for my schooling, really. I was given great opportunities and scholarships due to the whole TMEA process.
And Brigitte, where did you grow up? Near Houston?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I grew up kind of all over. I graduated from high school in Lake Jack. It was right on the Gulf.
Yeah.
But, my dad moved around a lot, so I went to Deer Park, Cypress Spring. We did a stint in Alabama. I'm not from Texas, but I've lived in Texas the majority of my life. Which is one of the reasons why going to Michigan was really interesting, because it was very different, very eye-opening to see all people from the different states and how every state kind of approaches music education in a different way.
And so I only brought that up because coming to the state of Washington, it's been this huge culture shock, because I was born and raised in Texas. It's all that I ever knew, taught in Texas, went to all my college work has been in Texas. So it's this huge culture shock, and so I want to pick up where you left off, coming back to the States, Dawn, but I think it's important for people that are listening. I see a ton of people. Leland Batts, it's good to see you, sir. Oh my goodness, Leland and Ruben Balboa. I see Joachim joined. It's great to see you guys. If you have any questions, please post some comments. But that is something that I still process, and I always feel kind of, I don't want to use the word ugly, but it feels weird, because I've been very outspoken about this, so I'm not saying anything that I think would surprise someone. There were aspects of fine art education in the state of Texas that I think are some of the best in the world. I think that they're extraordinary. But there are also parts of it that I think needed improvement. And nothing is perfect. And so there are things about Texas that I don't miss, things that I didn't agree with, and I don't think they were the reason that I left. I went to find a job, and I found a job. So there's nothing that drove me away from Texas, but it's not perfect. But it is so unique, and that's something is weird, is as I left Texas, the only thing I knew, because I was born and raised in the system and taught in the system, is like, oh, well, this is what public school teaching is like, no matter where you go. And then I got outside of Texas, and it was just like, it's so different. And it blew my mind how different it can look from state to state. So coming full circle, because Dawn, I want to pick up where you left off, but for people that are listening, I hope you can appreciate the perspectives between Brigitte and Dawn and myself are very different. We all had different routes into the classroom, and public school teaching looks different around the world. So Dawn, you're coming back from 14 years teaching and working in Germany and German systems of education, which are very different, not better, not worse, they're just very different. And so now you're in Texas, you're seeking an emergency certification, which Texas allows. For those that don't know, not every state allows that, but because I did an emergency cert when I started teaching. So you're seeking your emergency certification, so what's happening next?
Well, they called it alternative certification as opposed to emergency. But it was an emergency because I had 3 children and a husband we needed to make a living while my husband was going through his doctorate. So, but just real fast to talk about what you said about Texas being so unique, and it's really excellent in so many ways. When I went to and it really did open a lot of doors for me going into college as an undergrad. But when I moved to Germany to start my graduate degree, nobody had heard of anything called TMEA or the Texas All-State Choir. So they kind of looked at me and were like, oh, I'm sure that was very nice. And it had no weight. It played no role whatsoever in any of my in trying to flex on anybody over there. That did not work. So, I still stand 100% by the process because it offered me so many opportunities that I would not have had. Not to mention who would think to program music like that in a public high school I got to sing William Byrd and Johannes Brahms and Monteverdi as a 13-year-old. Mm-hmm. And had it not been for the TMEA process, I don't know what music would have been age appropriate for my choir at that point. What I was exposed to. So I'm always thankful for the process. So anyway, long story. Now fast forward many years ahead. I come back to Texas. I do get my alternative certification, which allowed me to work for a year while being. Basically, the way they do that is they fast track it. So you do your student teaching and your first year of teaching all at once. And you get a mentor that comes and gives you feedback. It gives you sort of a grade, meaning, yes, you passed your first year of teaching in such a way that it was, good or bad. And now you're allowed to go from a probationary certificate to a permanent certificate. Yeah. So that first year you teach on a probationary basis. And I did my first 3 years of teaching in public school in Texas in Seguin, and they were very kind to me, and I met a lot of great friends there and colleagues that I'm still good friends with. They really helped me through a very difficult 3 years, and then I was given the opportunity to come to join the faculty in San Marcos at Miller. When Brigitte started the program at Goodnight, I started the program at Miller. And due to rezoning, they let us open programs at each of the middle school campuses with our own director as opposed to having someone travel back and forth. So that was a great opportunity for both of us to sort of get in on the ground level and start building really long-term the thing that we now benefit from and create an atmosphere and a culture of singing, to steal that phrase from Joey Martin at Texas State. There's a lot of great singing going on in San Marcos from elementary schools all the way up, and I think we're an instrumental part of that. So now I taught at Miller for 3 years, and in 2009, that school year, I moved to the high school. 2012, I went to the high school, and have been there ever since. So, and I love it. Don't want to leave. Go Rattlers. I now bleed purple. My 3 children all graduated from there. They all 3 went through the choir program, and my 2 youngest who really got or took singing very seriously, went and both made all-state choir, and Noah's now at Texas State studying vocal performance. Emma was at TCU for a year and a half, and she's now home trying to figure out if she wants to sing anymore. And so we're just a whole family of musicians. My eldest, Daniel, was a percussionist at the high school and got his degree in sound recording technology. So it's all in the family here. As a matter of fact, we're fighting during these Zoom meetings to try to, okay, it's my turn. You can't play piano. Now I have to be on the, now you can sing, and it's crazy.
So Chris, first of all, I totally understand that feeling because I'm trying to like do stuff and I hear horns all in my house constantly. But it is interesting to kind of talk about the like where San Marcos came from, because 13 years, maybe it's 14. I got to do the math, but that long ago, sometimes it's so surreal to think about where it was. And like I look back and I look at our classroom and I look at all the pictures from years ago, and like I cannot believe that I was there for the start of it. And so like when I student taught, the San Marcos program had been through like 4 directors, like one after the other. And at one time, like when Angus McLeod was there, he was there for a long time. It was like a big powerhouse, and then it just kind of died when he left.
With Pat,
and he was there with Pat Fleming. Yeah, and then when they left, it just tanked. And so when I student taught, I didn't even really know what I was getting myself into. I just knew that I didn't have a lot of money and I needed to student teach somewhere close. And so they put me in San Marcos with our dear friend Helen, and she had walked into like, I mean, it was just a nightmare, you know. And so I walked in there, and I really, when I student taught, it was not a pretty picture. It was like, this is how it really is. And sometimes I'm so grateful that I didn't student teach somewhere where everything was built and perfect. I saw what it's like to struggle. I saw, and she had the middle schools were bused over to her. And I remember her telling me, like, just try to get a job in the district and we'll make it happen. And I did. I got that job at the elementary school, and I taught it for a year. And you kind of have to be true to who you are. And I'm not someone that's meant to teach elementary music. It just wasn't for me. I did it my very best while I did it. And then when I went to the intermediate school, I knew that it was only going to be for 1 year because they were rezoning. And I had someone tell me that there was no way that there was going to be 2 choir directors at the middle schools, that it just was never going to happen. And I was like, hold my beer and watch this, you know?
Yeah.
And I recruited my tail off.
And that was so much Helen Meyer's battle that she just would not let go and won for us.
And so like, I think that when they hired Dawn, both of the programs were still really small. And I think about the fact that I didn't even have a men's choir. At Miller, she had all her kids were just thrown into the classes, you know, and to now look at the product that comes from Miller Middle School after what we saw. Like, I remember when she left and we interviewed Mario, we interviewed him in a textbook room, you know, like just the difference between where it was then and where it is now, and what we get to walk into and to be part of that. It is one of the reasons why, even when I've had other opportunities, I'm just not ready to leave, because it's my baby, it's my family. I've been there from day one, man, you know. And
say this, Brigitte, if you are a beginning educator and you are looking for a job and you get the opportunity to start something at a place where there is nothing, I mean,
way to go.
when I was hired at Miller, they didn't even have a piano there yet. I mean, Helen fought to get a piano. There were no risers the first year, except for some that were built into the room, and it was a nightmare trying, with classroom management. The room had served as the broken furniture depot, and sometimes in school suspension classroom. And it was just a mess. It was a mess, and I know that the administration really looked at me as being very needy that year, because I kept saying, well, can we please get this? And we don't have this, and this is kind of standard practice to have something like this in a choral classroom. And how do you know that if you don't know that? And so it was our job to, in both instances, it was our job to sort of say, this is what we need to function. This is like baseline, what we need to function, and still make something amazing happen without all the bells and whistles that you think you might need to be an effective teacher at the beginning. But really, you do what you can with what you have at the time, and it is really a blessing. If I think back to those first couple of years, how it's all grown, and what we can now take advantage of, and it's labor for over a long time.
I want to touch on a few things that you guys have mentioned that I think are really important, and I'm so glad you're talking about this, because in my role, I actually get to place student teachers, which is a very kind of surreal responsibility to have, because especially I didn't matriculate through a traditional program, and I talk to the students frequently about that struggle of, do you gravitate towards these icons in the state, these exemplary teachers that have these phenomenal programs, or do you go to a smaller program or a more humble program where there aren't the numbers or there aren't the resources, and what are you really learning from either? And I come from, exactly, Brigitte, as you're articulating, I come from a place where the smaller programs, to me, are always more attractive, because you really do learn how to maximize resources and what to do. And these pillars of the field, whether it's choral or band or orchestra, they exist as an example, and they're going to continue to be an example, but so much of it is fueled by the educator that's running that program. And there's so many other, the administration plays a role, and the community that it's in plays a role, but it is good to hear you articulate that when you have the opportunity to either start your career where something has not been built yet, or to have at least a portion of your student teaching be at a place where someone is building, or they don't have that ideal situation. This is a conversation that comes up a lot with the students, because we pick up, and this is somewhat controversial, I hesitate to say it this way and sound overly judgmental, but it's difficult when you're working with future educators and you pick up a textbook, and the textbook outlines some perfect scenario that doesn't exist, and it's like, well, this is what your first year is going to be like, and this is what you're going to program your first year, and what you're going to buy your first year. And so I'm like literally laughing out loud, in front of my students, like this is not a reality, and it doesn't mean that you're not successful. And I think that's the scary thing that gets misunderstood, is if I don't have these things that I've read or I've studied or that I've admired from afar that this successful program has, I couldn't possibly be successful. But I remember teaching on the stage at Miller, and then in the health room, what used to store the health textbooks in the health classroom at Goodnight. And then we were in a band storage room, and then the stage, and then the old art classroom at Miller. The transitions that even the orchestra had in San Marcos to finally having classrooms and having these resources, it amazed me that I came in with all of these assumptions of like, well, I have to have these things, and you learn very quickly. Like, no, here is, I am, Dawn, you mentioned this, that even as a first-year teacher, you know a lot more than you give yourself credit for. That I know what a good sound is, or I've studied what it means to have a rehearsal and create this product, and so I'm going to focus on that. And there were all of these things that I taught an instrumental music education course last quarter, and I was talking to them about their first year and what they needed to prepare. And a big part of that conversation was like, here are a list of things that you should have accomplished, but like, let's look at uniforms. Take that off the list. Like, you don't have to be concerned to have this, all these tuxedos in your first year of teaching. Like, that is something you can build. That's not something that has to be right away. But having instruments, that's something that you should walk in the door and like know the vendors and know the pricing and know your community and what they can afford, because you're not going to have an orchestra unless you have the instruments. So it's interesting, until you're in your community where you're going to be teaching, it's really powerful to know that it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's not the secret formula. You have to get in there. You have to live there. You have to learn the community. And then, as both of you mentioned, you could have gone to San Marcos 15 years ago. You wouldn't find anything that exists there now. But because of the educators that have been put in place, because of the administration that's been put in place, and people that have moved at the right time in the right way, it creates these extraordinary programs. And both of you have built an extraordinary choral program in the school district. I want to ask you guys, if I can, just to shift it to the topic for this week, because it's something I really admire about both of your teaching. If you can talk about maybe doing it at the middle school and the high school, but how you manage, and I think choral directors in general do a better job of this. If I'm being candid, as an orchestra director, I feel like instructors of the voice, because it's so physiological, the instrument is internal, you always did this extraordinary job of teaching way past the music. I mean, you were teaching citizenship, you were teaching humility and respect, and especially Brigitte, you were one of the first music teachers I had sort of direct contact with. We were right next door to each other. I would see you in between every period, and I would go in and observe you all the time. I went to you with you to UIL. My very first year teaching, I was like on the bus as just like a chaperone, and I think I even played percussion for your men's group. I played bass. I played bass for like one of the choirs. And I always loved coming in, and especially with your men's choir, like it was mostly football players. It was this super intense, rowdy bunch, but it was like you literally taught them citizenry of like, this is respect, this is how we engage with each other, this is what it means when we're singing. And this was like, how did you guys navigate, or maybe you're still navigating, although I think you're both just extreme examples of this.
You still navigate that for sure.
How did you guys start thinking about those extra musical characteristics of your classrooms?
Well, so, I mean, I know Dawn can speak to this too. If you start with middle school, if we just talk about middle school for a moment, because a lot of first year educators will start off in a middle school level. Mm-hmm. I don't know how it is in Washington, but that is a very common thing here. And when it's actually one of the hardest levels to teach.
Yes.
Because you don't just teach music. The music is the last thing, because you are teaching them how to be good humans. And I think that there's an acceptance that has to happen, that you have to understand that, and that you have to be okay with that. That you have to be okay with the fact that unless they respect you, respect each other, respect the space, they'll never respect what you're trying to teach.
Wow.
And that goes for anything.
Yeah.
But I know that, I mean, there are times where I'm doing a warm up and this kid's facing the wall, and I just go over there and I turn him around and I keep on going, and there's just, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on this, because it is really the only way to be an effective educator is to teach the human first. And I think a big part of that is taking your ego and putting it aside, which I know that I struggle with. We all struggle with that. Yeah. And like your very first year, what, Dawn?
I said, yeah, you have to teach who's in front of you, not who you wish you had.
Wow.
And
yeah.
I can tell you that, like just a minute ago when she was talking about like what you can do when you don't have a whole lot. What Dawn and I have together is like a freaking mansion compared to where we started. It was like we started off in a 1-bedroom shack, living alone.
Yeah.
And then we moved in together into a mansion. That's really what it is. But I will never forget what it's like to live in that little shack, ever.
Yeah.
You know,
There are certain tenets of good education and of good choral education that you can demand if you're in a mansion or in a shack. You know,
absolutely.
Proper posture, proper just respect for the music, basically. And if you don't make it about you, and I think that the most important thing is this leaving your ego aside. There's like the music deserves a certain treatment. The music deserves the attention. The magic's in the details. All of those things. That doesn't matter what space you're in,
or what level you're going to teach, or what song it is.
Wow.
And teach. I feel like that's our opportunity, is to give kids the chance to see that there's something bigger than them, and especially middle school. That sort of middle school preteen drama, that can be so all encompassing, and I feel like and so overwhelming for them. I feel like those who kind of realize that this is just a phase, and I know I'll get through it, but right now while I'm going through it, it really is awful. Having a chance to say, like, I'm going to be a part of something bigger and nobler and greater than what is consuming me in my free time, and to have someone treat it with respect and take it seriously, not too seriously, obviously, but just give them a chance to all concentrate on something that's beautiful, and just for the sake of it being beautiful,
So
just for the sake of making something beautiful together. It's an oasis for them.
Here's something I've always wondered. Did either of you, is there a book you read, Brigitte, as you were matriculating your undergraduate work in music education at Texas State University? Shout out to the Bobcats. Was there like a course or something that you did that you feel prepared you to get into the classroom to say, I'm going to work on citizenship or respect or this kind of thing? Or where is that just something you feel like was innate, that you came in and recognized it and felt like you needed to do it? Like, where did that come from for you guys in the classroom?
Do you want me to be honest with you?
Yeah, please.
So I had a great education. I did. And I know that I did. And I think I learned more and retained more in my methods classes than I ever gave myself credit for. However, a big part of it is innate. Mm-hmm. And it is recognizing what the kids need, which and I have seen really effective educators that aren't as warm and caring, not caring, but like I'm a really nurturing, motherly person. I like to hug kids. I tell them that I love them. I talk to them, and that doesn't scare me. You know, Dawn and I are both like that. We're like mom, you know. And I think that the thing that helped me, which unfortunately most first years don't have, is that I was a mother when I started to teach.
Huh.
So I played to my strength, and that gave me strength. When I was fumbling in so many other ways, I think where I fumbled the most was like protocol and paperwork and figuring out like how to run an entire program, how to get a booster club together. Like all that stuff was not my strength. My strength was connecting with kids. And if you are really strong in other ways, you can learn how to be more effective with communicating with kids. Because I've seen that before, you know.
I would, if you don't have that firsthand, because not everyone who's a great teacher has to know what it feels like to like raise kids and stuff. It doesn't.
Exactly.
It doesn't.
One of the reasons why, Dawn, like, that's just who I've always been. I've been a mom as a grown-up. My entire adult life, I've been a mom.
Right.
So, like, that's all I can speak to. So, like...
If you don't have that experience, though, you're the big sister of the family, and you know what it's like to take care of, younger siblings, or you were a camp counselor and you were always in taking care of like little ones and stuff. That's where you can gather that experience. It's just that like
you can gather it from your own experiences too. One of the things that Dawn said about something that kids are going through, like I remember the way that I felt as a kid very strongly.
Yeah.
I can close my eyes and remember when that guy dumped me, or when that girl said something bad about me, and it stung. And that is like from 8 o'clock in the morning, sometimes earlier, to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This building that these kids are in, it's their home, and they very often spend more time at school than they do at home. And recognizing the way that they feel is valid. And that is huge.
Until you do, and until they know that you care about them, and that you understand that that's their life, and they take it seriously, and you help them get through it, as opposed to just making fun of them for feeling like that as a teenager. I think anybody who forgets how they felt as a kid is not going to be an effective teacher.
Yes.
It's interesting to hear you guys say that, because I know for me, and this is a huge caveat to people that are listening, I mean, it took me years to develop my program and to develop who I was as a teacher, and it's always changing. I mean, it's still evolving. I'm still discovering new things about myself as an educator. But when I finally I was in year 6. Like in year 6, I felt like I got it. I wasn't doing it all perfect, but I had finally conceptually understood this is what's required of me. This is what, as you're saying, Brigitte, like these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. How do I balance that out? And something that came to me is, I remember a student saying this to me, even though this seems so cliche, one of the best advice that I got as an educator was, the golden rule: treat others like you would want to be treated. And when I started, going to my students and treating them like I would want to be treated, and thinking about what was I like in high school or middle school, how would I want to engage with the teacher, which is difficult, especially in the performing arts. When you're a director of a program or you're a conductor, there is an ego, like a required ego that comes with that. If you're going to stand in front of 40 or 60 or 80 people and try to get them all to do the same thing, like you have to have a certain amount of ego. But transitioning that into instruction and engagement and all those buzzwords in education, I really tried to treat, especially in the orchestral world, I really tried to treat my students like colleagues. That I was like, I can wave a stick, it doesn't make music. Like I am dependent upon all of you to make music together. So like, let's do it together. And the conversations all became about us and we. And I had several students that would come to me, and it was so weird, as I really was unconscious of it. I'm not trying to sound like braggadocious. Like it seemed natural to me to just respect them. And they'd say, no one listens to me like you listen to me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm listening to you exactly the way I would want someone to listen to me. Like that was the secret sauce. That I was like, I'm going to treat you exactly like I would want someone to treat me. And the minute those things shift or change, I think that's where the conflict comes. The minute I start talking down to you or demanding something of you or not giving you the right to defend yourself or whatever the scenario, that's where a lot of my student conflicts came in, is I'd make assumptions, or I wouldn't give them this benefit of the doubt. I wouldn't treat them the way that I would want to be treated. And I immediately recognized, I'm so glad to hear both of you say it, and it's something I've always gravitated towards. I grew up a single child with a very strong female role model. I love my mother, and she taught me so much about life and how I live, and my personality is definitely modeled after her. When I saw both of you, I always admired what you were doing, because I saw that maternal instinct and how you engaged with your students, and the power of that, the trust that came with it. And I appreciate both of you, but Dawn, especially you saying, if you don't have that, if you're a young educator, or you don't have that paternal environment, whether it was like being an older sibling or having children yourself, or however you're coming into the classroom, How do you think that, I'm kind of wiggling this in there. For me, it was that mutual respect. It was treating the students like I would have wanted to be treated. It didn't mean that they were my equal, and I think that's the danger. I didn't treat my students truly like they were colleagues, because they're not. There was a level, a hierarchy that existed, and I was ultimately responsible for things as the teacher. So we weren't equals, but in terms of how we engaged with each other, I would treat them exactly like someone else would treat me, the way I talked to them, the conversations that we had. What do you guys think of that?
Well, go ahead.
I've seen some people that are very close to me have to learn how to connect with students a little bit more. And I think it's a willingness to have self-reflection and to learn how to not take things personally. Yeah. And there was one more I was going to say. To be very open and upfront with your expectations. Sometimes when you just put it out there in black and white, that's what a kid needs. Like, there have been times where a kid's like rude to me, especially in the middle school years, and I just looked at them. I'm like, I'm never rude to you. Why are you being rude to me? And instead of going like, don't say that, blah 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 blah, and like think about being a mall cop and how a mall cop is like, no offense if anyone listening is or ever was a mall cop, but there are some people in fields like that who take their little sliver of power and they just run with it. And we've all had educators who are like that. And really it's about, yes, you're in charge, but you're managing them. You're not in charge of them. You're managing all of that energy and that talent and the potential, and you hone it to make something great.
That's powerful.
And I think I don't really know how else to put it. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. I don't know if Dawn
That's brilliant.
It totally does. I think that making sure that from day one everybody knows what the common goal is. Then it turns into much less about having to manage people than it does to constantly remind them of what the common goal is. And when someone's straying from the common goal, then it doesn't make like that's why I said bingo. Really, most of the things that kids act out about, it's not you. And our ego gets in the way a lot of the time, and we think it's because of us. And really, we're just sometimes the person closest to them that they can actually let their feelings out to. So instead of reacting, you sort of have to go and say, like, okay, what's going on? And where did that come from? Because that's not usually how we interact. And always giving the student the benefit of the doubt, like, okay, I'm sure you didn't mean it that way, so what's happening?
Yeah.
And actually, you open the door for conversations that are honest and real. And for some students, it's the first time someone ever just gave them the opportunity to say, I didn't like how that was expressed and my feelings were hurt. And then you as an educator or as an adult, you have a chance to sort of learn something and go, I'd never thought about that might have come across as overly commandeering or dictatorial or whatever. Like, hey, I can work on myself now. Thank you for opening my eyes to that. I just feel like the more honest you approach them, regardless of what age, but especially at the high school level, when they're being pushed more and more to being autonomous and having to be independent, having to learn, they're on the precipice of going and starting their college, their grown-up life. Well, it's such a hard time for them because in so many ways people want to give them the responsibility and give them their independence and give them all of these tasks that they're supposed to do. But then as soon as they do something you don't like, you end up treating them again like they're 5. And that just does not fly with them. And I think it's it's in your own in your own best interest to help facilitate that independence, as opposed to act like it's some reward that you're giving them.
Yeah. We had a question
Chris,
that was posted. Oh, go ahead, Brigitte.
Well, I do want to let everyone know, and Dawn will say this too, to where we are in our program has been, we have both said things that we shouldn't have said to kids. We've both been called out by kids. I actually had a conversation just a few weeks ago that was really hard for me to hear, but I tried really hard to not take it personally, and I had a conversation with him, and we moved past it, but it was hard. It is hard to hear things that you're not maybe doing the way that you need to be doing them.
Yeah.
So I think someone could teach for 35, 40 years and still have times where they say something that scars someone, or, we had a kid come up to us this year.
Yeah.
And this whole time he had taken something that we said at him, which was not at all. It was never directed toward him. And it just goes to show how one thing that you say can just ruin a kid's year, and it's kind of scary, but so it's not to be taken lightly. And then when you find something now and you go, whoa, okay, I never meant that at all, then you have to have that conversation without making it about you.
Yeah.
That's huge. Absolutely. I've never said anything that I should not have said. That is a huge lie. But it's interesting. I think that humility, what's unique is that the humility that comes from actually talking to your students about how you can improve is very different than trying to find the right way to say this. You can still be humble and have an ego with your students.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I learned, that I would constantly be taking feedback and be reflecting on my teaching, but I never showed it to my students. I never allowed myself to be vulnerable and take the criticism in real time, or say, you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't want it to come out that way, and this is how I said. And I distinctly remember, I was in my 4th year, I was full-time at the high school for my first year, and I remember saying that, and everybody kind of sitting back, and it was this terrifying realization to me that, and I ended up saying this, I still say it, it's like my old man adage that I always tell people, that you can control what you put out into the world, but you cannot control how people take it. And it was something that it was this huge realization for me, that from me being, well, and both of you knew this from students that we shared through the Triumph Honor Society and other interactions we would collaborate. From my perspective, I was this huge, big, warm teddy bear that just loved all my students and would do anything for my kids. And then I'd get feedback from people that were like, no, you're so intimidating and aggressive. And I'm like, what are you doing? I had no idea that someone would perceive me that way until I let down my guard. And I really asked people did that come across this way? Or how did you feel about what I just did? And I started moving past. It's a fine line. Sometimes my rehearsals would be taken over by this, but I moved past the music of just not, I'm going to teach the music, at what costs? And I finally had those conversations of, how could I have communicated that better? Because I can sense that you were all tense, or I can sense that didn't come across right, and it shocked them. I remember.
One of the best things I ever heard in a professional development session was actually we went on a retreat, all of the music directors in Germany at the school where I taught. And our boss said, just remember, the listener always determines what your message was.
Ooh, yeah.
The listener will always determine the message. And so you can say it till you're blue in the face, but they're going to determine how you meant it. And that's it's a scary kind of concept, because you might have the best intentions, but it's really important to keep following up and keep making sure everyone's on the same page.
I want to
And
go to the question that we got. We're essentially out of time, but I think this was a really powerful question that someone posted. Did you ever battle with imposter syndrome and feelings of intimidation or feeling like you didn't know enough to teach? And how did you overcome that? And then hello to Kyla Ferris, one of my students at SPU. She echoed that sentiment. And so I think a couple people here liked that comment. And I'd love to know, before we leave, how did you guys battle that, especially coming into your first year? Hello, Joachim. I'm glad you got your Nutella. Especially coming into your first year, I know that I did, and I shared, I shared some of it last week talking about my journey into public school and then transitioning to higher ed. But I definitely love y'all's perspective. Did you deal with that, and then how did you overcome it?
I'll break up that before.
I have imposter syndrome. The fact that my
that sound. What does that sound?
Joachim, you can't make coffee right this second because it's really loud. Sorry.
So,
yeah.
I would say, like, every day of my life, I feel like that.
Yeah.
I mean, we both. It actually is kind of nice when you work with someone, when you have those moments, you can like actually voice them to someone versus like sitting in your office and crying, all by yourself. Yeah. So
I think you know your phases as an educator. I think that there are certain things that you do well, but then there are other things that you need work on. So like the things that you do well, that gives you the confidence to keep going. And then in the meantime, you work on yourself. I mean, that's what, the professional development's for. That's why we seek out certain extra programs, or that's why I went and tried to get my, I actually finished it, got my master's also at Texas State, go Bobcats. And I did the summer program as well, because I didn't feel like a conductor. I knew I was a musician. I knew that I was, at times a singer, but I wanted to be able to organize my hands, which, were my means of communication while conducting. I just felt like I wasn't where I needed to be, so I went and got my conducting degree. But I think that anybody, all three of us are conductors, and you still sometimes feel like this is my jam. I know how to teach this. And there are other times, it took me 8 years to program Renaissance.
Wow.
Because I just was like, I know how to teach a lot of this music, but I don't know if I know how to teach this and do it justice. So at some point then you go, now I'm ready to tackle that. Now I'm ready to teach that. So this is really important for all young educators. You don't have to be good at everything right at the beginning.
Amen.
Or honestly, or like ever, you don't have to be good at everything ever, and case in point, so this had COVID not hit, we would have been doing a French piece by Fore with our JV women's choir. And I don't mind teaching languages, but I study. And sometimes when I teach languages, it's really hard for me. Like, yeah. I remember when I first started, like, it was right before I student taught, and I had this realization that I was going to like actually have to teach. And I just had several days where I shut down, and I was like, how can I teach when I stutter? No one's going to want to listen to me. And like, and I just had convinced myself that I could never do it. And then I just did. It was just one of those things where your desire to do what you want is just always a little bit more than the fear, Mm-hmm. And so like, in year 13 or 14, whatever year this is, so Dawn is great at languages, and she does not stutter. And so very, very often I rely on her. But then I start to realize that I'm using her as a crutch. And I had this conversation with her about like, when do I decide that I need to just do it, whether or not she's there or not, or when do I decide, that it's worth me conquering my fear. Like I've taught languages without her before, but never as wordy because of my fear, because of my fear of stuttering constantly. But then I just did it, my desire to teach a super wordy French song was more than my fear of teaching that super wordy French song, because I loved it and I knew I wanted to teach it. And so we knew our thing.
We also, you become motivated to do things that scare you because you know it's what the kids need. And that gives you like superpowers you never knew you had. Whenever you put them first and you go, all right, they need this, so I'm going to roll up my sleeves and learn.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so powerful too for, it's interesting. I mean, and I'm so grateful that I had the experiences I had in public school trying to transition into higher ed, and it's surprised, I think, some of my students, but I hope they recognize how sincere it is. I've started almost, I think, pretty much every course that I've taught thus far in my first year. The very first thing I say is, all right, I'm learning. Like, I'm learning with you. Here are the things I've experienced and I want to share with you, but I am learning, and I'm going to extend grace just as much as I want to receive it, because there is a lot that I can share with you, some things that I can teach you, but you are a vital part of this, right? It's the engagement is what's crucial. And Dawn, it couldn't have been said better. If the student is first, it is so crazy how much everything really can just fall in place. It's not easy. I wouldn't ever give anyone the impression that it's easy, but this is something that we read about and we say, and it's printed on T-shirts and on our tote bags that, like, student first is the key to education. But it's so true. If you really are teaching, thinking about your students, then so many of the challenges and issues that arise in learning environments, they are taken care of because you've anticipated it by putting your student first and thinking about what the challenges are and identifying them before you start the lesson or the rehearsal or whatever it is. I want to respect your time and the people that are listening. I'm so grateful to everybody that chimed in this week. I definitely know this won't be the last time I will reach out to you guys. There is so much that you have to share in your careers and your combined wisdom as partners and colleagues, but also in the unique journeys you guys have had into public education and everything that you've accomplished. I hope that everybody has taken something unique away from this conversation. So many awesome quotes, I think, to pull away from this. Regardless if you're in band, choir, orchestra, general music, whatever it is, I think that last sentiment shared by Dawn is something to walk away with. Put your students first, and to take away from some of Brigitte's words that she just shared. You're not going to be perfect at everything ever, right? I mean, just enjoy that process of learning. That's arguably why we are in education, and learn with your students. And don't be afraid of showing that vulnerability and engaging in that learning process in your classroom with your students. Thank you guys so much. I cannot tell you how much I miss you. It's painful to not be in Texas with my colleagues, but we are still friends and we still have opportunities to connect that will never be taken away. And I cherish everything that I learned from you, and I continue to learn from you as I watch the extraordinary success of your students and your families and yourselves. Thank you for everybody that listened this week. Please come back next week at noon Pacific time. It'll be great to have you guys with us again. I'll be reaching out to some more colleagues and starting up a new conversation. If you have some ideas of something that you want us to talk about, please feel free to PM me or shoot me an email and let me know what you're thinking about, and I'll reach out to some people that I know. If you have someone that you'd love to see us have a conversation with, please feel free to suggest that as well. I hope you all have a fantastic Sunday as you prepare for another week of online engagement to learn and to make art and to just stay connected. As we're practicing social distancing and creating distance with ourselves physically, it's very important. Don't distance yourself intellectually and spiritually and artistically. Stay connected. Be connected to your friends and your family. Hey, Noah. How you doing, sir? So great to have all of you guys here. Dawn and Brigitte, don't go away. I'm going to end the Facebook Live feed, but I want to say goodbye to you guys and say hello to everyone you're around. So thank you guys for watching. Tune in next week. We'll see you again soon.